Let us pray. A ministry of scandals, a documentary exposing abuse within the IFB, dropped, and the responses of IFB pastors and those in the IFB are interesting to say the least. As someone who spent nearly 3 decades in that movement, I have found the responses largely unsurprising to say the least. And I want to provide a little commentary on what's going on. One of the most frequent responses I'm seeing on social media from IFB pastors is ad hominem, or the informal logical fallacy of attacking the man. First, they're attacking Eric Skorzynski, the star of the series. He's also the host of Preacher Boy's podcast and has a social media presence focused on exposing the physical, mental, and sexual abuse within the IFB movement. Eric is an admitted apostate, and I've seen some IFB pastors referring to him as Eric the Apostate in their responses to his work. I've also seen people going after Warner Brothers and HBO as companies that, quote, hate God and, quote, hate the Bible. Let's be perfectly clear. Hollywood is not the friend of the church. Yes, it is totally reasonable to expect liberal Hollywood to jump on any opportunity they can to go after the church. Gone are the days of the 10 Commandments and the greatest story ever told. One tweet said, "I'm also not for throwing men previous to us under the bus, especially based on the highly slanted and often egregiously errant documentary of an apostate. But just because liberals don't like Christianity does not mean that they should be immediately discounted. Therein lies the problem of ad hominem or attacking the man. We cannot simply dismiss the facts because they're brought by an admitted apostate, and I mean that in its grammatical sense, not as an insult. We also cannot dismiss accusations because Hollywood is associated with it. No. We must deal with the substance. That tactic does not fly. A second tactic that I have seen is dismissing based on the amount of time passed. One tweet I read said this: "Is this seriously about something from the 1990s? And all the details are being filled in by people that hate the church? If so, Christians should be passing on this one." As you can see, this person not only seeks to dismiss these facts because of who brought them, but because of when they happened. They happened in the early 1990s, so we should not really be focusing on them. Well, tell that to anyone who is a victim of abuse. Tell that to a soldier dealing with PTSD. The old adage, time heals all wounds, is not a fact. Some wounds never heal, and others that scar over still hurt the rest of one's life. It is understandable that someone who has been groomed and molested and physically and mentally abused by a pastor or a family member would be angry at God. And when they need someone to help them and to help them in their relationship with God, they end up with someone who abuses them in the name of God. They see someone put on an outward presentation of godliness and holiness, while these victims see the real monster that they are. Then they see their perpetrators put on a pedestal, exalted as men of God that are not to be questioned, and who is believed to be beyond reproach. Afraid of the system they were raised in, no one to tell for fear that they won't be believed, many of these people are simply trapped. Time does not heal all wounds.
There was a time I could see, and I have seen, boys like these, younger than these, their arms torn out, their legs ripped off. But there is nothing like the sight of an amputated spirit. There is no prosthetic for that.
The suggestion that some of these events happened over 20 years ago is not grounds for dismissal. What is the statute of limitations on abuse such as this? Does God dismiss it after a number of years? Should we? We should not, because He does not. The person who made the tweet about dismissing these things when confronted about court cases and evidence made this statement: "Have you read the trial transcripts? If not, you're basing everything on how Warner Brothers wants you to." That's willful ignorance. Then, there are others that are trying to distance themselves from the situation altogether. A prominent pastor in my area made this crass statement. Let me get this straight. There's a documentary out there that most of us haven't seen involving preachers and ministries we're not affiliated with that have committed egregious sins we already condemn from our pulpits. But if we haven't made a statement about it, we're part of the problem.
Well, just a second there, Professor.
First, if you haven't watched it, how do you know there's no affiliation? I was blown away when my wife told me that one of the men discussed in this documentary is a pastor where I took my kids to a youth revival a couple years ago. We did not know him at all, but we knew the popular IFB pastor who was speaking there. Do you know what that means? That means that I have every right to be questioned about whether or not I knew the history of that pastor. It is also fair to ask the IFB preacher that I took my kids to hear if he knew the background of that pastor. The pastor who made this tweet has had that same IFB preacher and prominent speaker who spoke for that pastor has had him preach in his own church. This pastor cannot honestly say that they're not involved or affiliated with them. Now, no, you may not run in the same circles, but your circles overlap their circles. My circles overlap their circles. No, it's not a case of 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. The guys that preach in these offenders' pulpits had preached in the churches of the man who just made that tweet that I shared with you. The pastor that made that tweet added the John C. Riley, meme. I love this brother, but no, you don't get to run in circles with people that run in their circles and then distance yourself when trouble comes. We have to answer those questions. How did we get here? The IFB protected Jack Hyles. Curtis Hudson, according to a letter readily available on the internet, purportedly admitted to knowing about Jack Hyles' exploits. But he wouldn't do anything about it because it would do more harm to fundamentalism. Again, that is based on a letter supposedly written by Curtis Hudson's own hand that you can find online in about 30 seconds. How many of us grew up going to the Sword Conference or sending our pastors to the Sword Conference knowing those affiliations? How many continued associating with Hyles after Hyles and Scott? How many of us still look up to Roloff and everyone who had him come and preach after hearing about the physical and mental abuses going on in the Roloff homes? Here's what many IFB pastors did. They simply dismissed it because those men were heroes. They were too big to fail. Any accusation was an attack of the devil. It was an attempt to thwart what God was doing and to attack the men of God. Many years ago, my pastor and I got into a very heated argument. We can call it a fight. Verbal, but a fight nonetheless. Pastor had started helping a young man from Hyles Anderson. Some of us were very suspicious about this man and saw reasons not to trust him. But Pastor had a big heart and wanted to help him. That man almost ruined my pastor's ministry. And without going into details, he ended up in prison for the very things described in the documentary that we're now talking about. Many years ago, we were affiliated with a church, pastored by a very popular IFB pastor and revival speaker that used to have a children's home before he became the pastor. The house parent was accused of sexual misconduct by one of the children. Many of the supporters of this home summarily dismissed the accusations as the blatant attacks of a lost person trying to cause trouble and stop the work of God. The man who was accused consistently denied the accusation, but eventually took his own life over that situation. Was he guilty or innocent? I don't know. But I do know that the quick dismissal of the accusation by many is consistent with the reports in this documentary. Let us pray, and other examples of abuse within the IFB, yeah, they're real. But not everyone is distancing themselves from the reality that this documentary is bringing to light. Let me show you the appropriate way to handle this situation. The pastor of New Testament Missionary Baptist Church directly addressed this on Sunday night. Listen to this brave brother.
The documentary had to be made because people didn't stand for right. And so I tell you this, New Testament Missionary Baptist Church will stand for right. And I'm live streaming this on purpose because I want to be able for someone to use this if need be. And I prayerfully can pray that it never happens. There are men who have hid sin for the sake of not wanting to destroy their ministry. And that's why I said at the beginning of this message, I would rather this ministry shut down and us stand for what's right than to cover sin and to keep trying to move forward. We're going to be redoing some of the Constitution and bylaws in the next year. Not because they're old. They're over 50 years old. They need to be updated. There are things happening in today's world that we are not protected from. And in that, we're going to take a very strong stand about how sin is dealt with in this church. It's not going to be covered up. And listen, as long as I'm pastor here, by the grace of God, if I find out the sin has happened and you all and someone's involved in trying to cover it up, not only is the person who committed the sin going to be in trouble, but those who are trying to help cover the sin will be held accountable as well. And I'm telling you now, if by some chance, listen, I'm human just like you all. I'm no better, no stronger, no more spiritual than any of you. If I mess up and if I fail, do not protect me. Throw me under the church. Crush me. Throw me under the jail. That's what's required. This church, this organization is not worth saving if it's not willing to stand up for what is right. And I'm going to say this, and y'all can be upset with me if you want. I don't know how this will affect much right now. Hopefully it never will. We will not associate with churches and pastors who cover up sin either.
Thank God for this IFB brother. Listen to him. Learn from him. Be like Pastor Lee Short. And Brother Short, if you see this video, thank you for this biblical stand. And may God honor and bless you and your church for the example of how to correctly respond to situations like this. Now, how do we prevent things like this from happening? First, knock the pedestal out from under the man of God. In fact, the best thing to do would be to adopt a plurality of elders, with the pastor-teacher being the first among equals. This takes the executive power away from one single person and helps eliminate the many dictatorships and MOG worship that is rampant in the IFB. And by the way, it's a biblical form of church government. Secondly, every group home or organization that cares for children needs to have a real board of directors. If the board never meets, they need to be dissolved and disbanded and reconstituted with a real board that will provide real oversight. Boards should investigate and involve law enforcement in the investigation of any allegation of criminal misconduct. Further, donors and supporters need to be made aware when such allegations are made and their outcome. If representatives are found negligent, culpable, or otherwise involved in criminal or biblical misconduct, they should be removed from the position and from any association with the organization. If these two things were implemented, the problems would not go away, but the cover-ups would. The secretive nature of the corruption would be addressed. Trust could be re-earned. But as long as we're walking around with blinders on, nothing is going to change. But know this, there is coming a day when all that is hidden will be revealed, as it is appointed unto man once to die, and after this, the judgment.